On the night of June 12, 1963, Medgar Evers didn't just die. He was silenced violently in the very place where he'd fought for the voices of the oppressed to be heard. A bullet, fired in cold blood, shattered the calm of a Mississippi summer night, and for a brief, brutal moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. But Medgar's death, this tragic murder, would not go unnoticed. It would spark a fire that would roar across America, demanding justice. This is the story of a man who stood for equality, for change, and the fight that followed. A fight that would take decades to resolve, but ultimately justice would be done. It was late, just after midnight, when the sound of a gunshot broke the silence. In the sleepy town of Jackson, Mississippi, the life of one of the most prominent civil rights leaders in America was extinguished. Medgar Evers, a 37-year-old husband, father, and field secretary for the NAACP, was gunned down in his own driveway. The bullet, fired from a sniper's rifle, struck him in the back, just as he stepped out of his car, the door still ajar. His wife, Merle, stood frozen at the door, a scream caught in her throat, as their 3 young children cowered inside. The assailant's face was a mystery, hidden in the shadows of history. But his weapon, the gun that had become the voice of hatred, was clear. And his message, too, was unmistakable. Medgar, you have no place here. You don't belong in this world. Not with your dreams of equality. Medgar Evers had been a beacon of hope for the Black community in Mississippi, tirelessly fighting against segregation, voter disenfranchisement, and injustice. He had worked to bring awareness to the violent racism that plagued the South, pushing for change where many saw none. But this fight for freedom came at a great cost, a cost that his life would ultimately pay. The killer, a man named Byron De La Beckwith, was a member of the white supremacist group, the White Citizens Council. De La Beckwith believed his actions would stop the tide of change that was sweeping the country. He believed that by killing Medgar, he could bury the movement that had already grown too powerful for him to ignore. But he didn't. Medgar's murder was a tragedy, yes, but it was also a turning point. His death was not in vain. In the days and weeks that followed, his family, friends, and supporters mourned, but they didn't rest. They stood up, they protested, they marched. They knew, deep down, that Medgar's fight for justice was far from over. And in the courthouse, where De La Beckwith would eventually stand trial, an irony began to unfold. Because as much as the white supremacists tried to erase Medgar's legacy, as much as they sought to stifle the progress he'd fought for, the power was shifting. Slowly but surely, the dream of a free, equal society was taking root. For over 30 years, justice was denied. The trial of Byron De La Beckwith in 1964 ended in a hung jury. Despite overwhelming evidence, the white jury couldn't bring themselves to convict him. De La Beckwith walked free, and Medgar's family was left to pick up the shattered pieces of their lives. But the world and the country were changing. The civil rights movement was gaining strength, and what had been an isolated act of terror was now part of a larger struggle. The echoes of Medgar's death rippled far beyond Mississippi. His sacrifice became the symbol of the fight for equality, a fight that could not and would not be extinguished. Years passed, but the fight for justice never stopped. Medgar's widow, Merle, never gave up. She spent decades advocating for her husband, demanding that the case be reopened. She pushed through the pain, fueled by the need for justice, refusing to let the memory of her husband fade into obscurity. And in 1994, after 31 years of waiting, the power finally shifted. New evidence emerged. New leaders rose. De La Beckwith, now a frail old man, was arrested again. This time, the jury was different. The verdict would be different. On February 5, 1994, Byron De La Beckwith was convicted of murder, the murder of Medgar Evers. It was a long time coming. It was a trial filled with anger, grief, and redemption. But most of all, it was justice. The man who had so coldly taken Medgar's life now faced the consequences. His guilt was undeniable, and the truth had finally won. As De La Beckwith was sentenced to life in prison, Merle Evers, Medgar's widow, stood tall. A woman who had lived through unimaginable pain and loss, a woman who had fought for what was right, now saw justice served. It was a victory not just for her family, but for all who had been touched by Medgar's vision of equality. Medgar Evers' death wasn't just a murder. It was the spark of a revolution that changed the course of history, even if it took decades. His life and his death remind us all that justice isn't always immediate. It doesn't always come when we want it or in the way we expect. But when we fight for what's right, when we demand that the world be a place of fairness, justice will come. In Medgar's words, "You can kill a man, but you can't kill an idea." The idea of equality, of justice, lived on, and it always will. Sometimes the price of justice is paid in blood, but sometimes that blood is the fuel that powers the flames of change. Justice was delayed for Medgar Evers, but it was not denied. It took the country years to finally acknowledge the truth of what happened, but in the end, the message was clear. No matter how long it takes, we will fight for justice, and in the end, it will be served. This story, full of sorrow and pain, reminds us of the power of resilience. It shows us that even when faced with the darkest forces, we must never lose sight of the light. The struggle for justice is ongoing, but as long as we remember those who fought before us, like Medgar Evers, we can continue the fight for a better, more just world. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for future deep dives into the most shocking true crime cases. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for more true crime cases that demand to be heard.